The black diver, they left at sea. They cut his airline and left him in the ocean because stopping to pull him up would have cost them the race. Marcus Hale was 40 feet down along the hull of a super yacht called the Meridian when he found the compartment that wasn't on any blueprint, and he keyed his radio to report it, and the answer that came back was not a word. It was a jolt, a hiss, and then silence as someone on the deck above severed his surface air supply. When he broke the surface, spitting, hauling himself half out of the water on the swim step, the yacht's owner, Grant Mercer, looked down at him, the way you look at a piece of gear that has failed, and gave an order, and the crew cast off the diver's tender and opened the throttles, and the great white hull pulled away toward the starting line of the charity regatta, and the people on the aft deck laughed as Marcus grew smaller and smaller in the wake. 3 hours later, Marcus Hale surfaced again. This time he surfaced at the finish line in front of the live cameras, in front of the whole yacht club, dragging behind him through the water. A steel case stamped with a corporate logo, and he pulled the mouthpiece from his face and said loud enough for every microphone on the dock to catch it, "You didn't leave me out there to die. You left me out there with the evidence." For a moment, the finish line went silent. The champagne suspended the commentators. Mid-sentence, 500 people in white and gold, staring at a dripping man who had risen out of the sea they thought had swallowed him. Grant Mercer's face, up on the winner's deck, did a thing Marcus would remember for the rest of his life. It flickered just once, from triumph to something closer to horror. The specific horror of a man watching the one loose end he'd cut come walking back up the dock with a rope in its hand. And the case in Marcus's hands began to beep a slow, steady electronic pulse, a countdown that had already begun. Before you find out what was in that case and why it was counting down, subscribe, because this is a story where the person who saves your life and the person who sells you out turn out twice to be the same hands, and the man behind all of it isn't the man who cut the airline. And hold on to one question the whole way down, because the whole thing rests on it. Who gets to decide how much danger a working person has to accept when the people giving the orders never get in the water themselves? 6 hours before they left him at sea, Marcus Hale had come aboard the Meridian to do a job, and they had made him use the crew hatch. Hawaz, the lead commercial diver, hired to inspect the super yacht's hull before the regatta, a man with 20 years underwater and a former career in marine rescue. And when he arrived at the marina, the members of the yacht club looked at his scuffed gear and his weathered case and decided out loud within his hearing that the diver couldn't be the one in charge. "Is your supervisor coming?" a woman in white linen asked him, glancing past his shoulder, as if the real diver, the one who'd be running things, were still parking the truck. "I'm the supervisor," Marcus said. "Oh." A small adjustment of the face, the recalculation people do when the world doesn't match the picture in their heads. "Well, the equipment can go around the side, I'm sure." Marcus had heard every version of that sentence for 20 years. He did not spend energy on it anymore. Energy underwater is life. You learn not to waste it on the surface. He carried his own gear, checked his own tanks, and made a private note of every face that had looked through him. Because in his experience, the people who don't see the diver on the dock are the same people who don't think about the diver when they give the order that puts him in danger. Grant Mercer, the billionaire who owned the Meridian, greeted him by the wrong name, the name of a different black man who had worked the docks the year before and did not correct himself when Marcus told him the right one. "The technical entrance is aft," a steward told him when Marcus moved toward the main gangway. So Marcus went aft and used the crew hatch and said nothing, because he had learned a long time ago that a diver who argues on the dock does not get to see what's under the boat. Elise Grant was the harbor master, precise and cool and giving nothing away, and she checked Marcus's certifications with a thoroughness that felt at first like just another kind of contempt. One more person looking for the flaw in the papers that would let her send him away. She turned each certification over. She read the fine print, and then she handed the folder back, and without looking up, without changing her expression. She said a string of 6 numbers, low and fast, the way you'd pass a note in a place with too many eyes. "What's that?" Marcus said. "A frequency," she said, "in case your working channels go quiet." And she walked off down the dock, before he could ask what she meant by go quiet, before he could ask why a harbor master would hand a contract diver a private emergency frequency and then pretend she hadn't. Marcus filed it away. He filed everything away. It was a habit from rescue work where the detail you ignore is the one that kills you later. He found the first wrong thing before he ever got in the water. Walking the Meridian's waterline, he saw a weld along the hull that was new bright, recent a seam where the original blueprints showed nothing but continuous plate. Super yachts do not get fresh hull welds days before a race for no reason. He went to the captain, a working man named Theo Marsh, who had the tired eyes of someone taking orders he didn't like, and Theo told him not unkindly to sign the safety certification and let it go. "Just sign it, man," Theo said. "The race can't be late. You don't want to be the reason it's late. Trust me, you don't want that." "Theo," Marcus said, "man to man, there's a fresh weld on that hull that isn't on any plan you gave me. You know that. You've been on this boat longer than the paint. What's behind it?" Theo Marsh looked out at the water for a long moment, and something moved in his tired face, something that wanted to say the truth and had a mortgage and a family and a master's license that could be pulled with a phone call. "I know what side my bread's buttered on," he said finally. "That's all I know. Same as you should. Sign the paper, Marcus. Take your fee. Go home. Some boats you don't want to know what's in the hull." He said it almost gently, the way you warn someone off a thing you've already lost yourself to. Marcus did not sign it. He wrote instead in the certification field that a new unlogged weld required internal inspection before the hull could be certified safe, and he initialed it and he handed it back. Theo looked at what he'd written, like a man watching a door close, and Marcus understood watching him that the captain wasn't the enemy. The captain was just another working man who'd already been asked the question Marcus was about to be asked, and had answered it the other way. He went down anyway on the final scheduled dive because the job was the job, and down along the hull he tapped the plating with the butt of his knife, listening the way you listen for a void, and where the new weld ran the hull rang hollow. There was a compartment behind it that appeared on no drawing. Near a valve at the lower edge of it, the water had a faint discoloration, an oily shimmer with a chemical edge that his eyes and the taste at the corner of his mouthpiece both flagged as wrong. He took a sample in a vial from his kit because a diver who suspects contamination always takes a sample, and then he keyed his radio to report the hidden compartment. That was when they cut his air. There is a particular sound an airline makes when it's severed at the surface, a sharp report and then a rush, and then a terrible nothing, and Marcus had trained his whole life to keep his head in the half-second after that nothing. Most divers, when their air stops, reach for their throat. It's instinct. It kills them. The trained ones reach for their bailout valve and their heart rate, if they're very good, actually drops because they have practiced this exact moment 1,000 times on purpose, so that when it comes for real, their body already knows what to do. He did not panic. Panic is what drowns you. That was the first thing rescue diving had beaten into him. He had a bailout bottle, a small emergency air supply every serious diver carries, and it gave him minutes, not hours. He used them to think instead of thrash. He was too far from shore to swim it on the air he had. But he was not too far from the old wreck he'd noted on the charts that morning. A sunken fishing trawler on the shelf. A few hundred yards off and inside a wreck like that in an air pocket trapped against the overturned hull, a diver who knows what he's doing can find something to breathe. He switched to the bailout bottle, checked the gauge, did the math. Cold, this much air, this depth, this current, that wreck. It was tight. It was survivable if he did everything right and nothing surprised him. He set his heading and he went kicking slow and steady, keeping his breathing shallow and even spending nothing. He didn't have to spend because the difference between a diver who lives and a diver who doesn't is very often just the discipline of not being afraid out loud. The trawler lay on the shelf where the chart said it would, an old fishing boat gone down years ago, hull rolled half over. He knew what he was looking for. When a boat capsizes and settles, air gets trapped against the highest point of the overturned hull, a pocket that can persist for a long time, and a diver who understands the physics of it can find something to breathe, where the surface says there's nothing but steel and silt. He worked his way under the canted deck, found the pocket by the silver shimmer of its surface, and pushed his head up into the stale, foul, blessed trapped air of a dead boat, and he breathed and he lived. That is not a miracle. That is training. Every tool that saved him, the bailout bottle, the chart he'd studied that morning, the knowledge of where drowned air hides he had brought with him or noted in advance, because the ocean does not hand you rescues you didn't prepare for. The people on the Meridian had counted on Marcus Hale being helpless the moment they cut his line. They had never once imagined that the man they didn't see on the dock might be the best prepared person for 100 miles. And there on the shelf near the wreck, half buried in silt, he found something that changed the shape of everything. A cluster of sealed drums and monitoring sensors, industrial deliberate, bearing the faded markings of a marine waste remediation project that had officially been completed and celebrated years ago. Except the drums were still here, still leaking, and the compartment in the Meridian's hull, he understood now, was built to carry more of them out to be dumped, where no one would look. The oily shimmer he'd tasted at the valve, the discoloration in the water, the fish he hadn't seen a single one of on his way down the whole poisoned quiet of this stretch of ocean, it all clicked into a single shape. The remediation project that the yacht club celebrated at its galas. The one whose banners flew over the regatta had never cleaned anything. It had just moved the dumping somewhere. The cameras didn't point, and it had made money doing it, and it had built its charitable reputation on the exact crime it was committing. Marcus hung there in the cold water, beside the leaking drums, and understood two things at once. That he was looking at the reason they'd cut his air, and that if he came up with only his word, the word of the diver nobody had seen on the dock, they would bury him the way they'd buried this. He needed the data. He needed proof they could not talk their way past. So instead of surfacing to save himself, he went to work. He needed to get back with proof. He surfaced cautiously, riding the stops his training demanded, even now, even alone, even with nobody to know if he cut a corner, because the bends don't care whether anyone is watching. He found a maintenance boy and lashed to a service float. He began the long haul back toward the harbor on the current, towing the steel case he'd freed from the seabed. It cost him more than the swim. Halfway back, the drag of the case and his kit together was pulling him under faster than the float could hold, and he had to choose. The dive rig on his back was worth thousands of dollars, half his livelihood, tanks and regulators, and the tools of 20 years. The case was worth a fishery, a coastline, the truth. He unbuckled the harness. He let the rig slide off his shoulders and drop away into the blue, and he watched it go down, spiraling slowly, the most expensive thing he owned, and he did not reach for it. Then he wrapped the tow line, another turn around his wrist, and kept swimming, because a man who has already been left to drown learns fast what he'll carry and what he'll let sink. He reached the finish line at the worst possible moment for the people who'd left him in front of the cameras, and he made his accusation, and the case beeped in his hands. And Grant Mercer, without missing a beat, told the assembled press and officials that the diver was a disgruntled contractor, attempting to extort him, and produced with suspicious readiness a personnel file showing that Marcus Hale had once been fired from a rescue operation for a safety violation. The harbor police presented with a calm billionaire in a blazer and a soaking wet black man making wild claims about hidden compartments and dumped poison did the thing the powerful count on them to do. They put the handcuffs on the man, dripping on the dock. They did not board the yacht. They did not ask why a diver hired that morning was 3 hours overdue and had washed up at the finish line half-drowned. They took the word of the man who looked like their idea of a man whose word counts. That is not an exaggeration of how it works. Marcus had known going up the dock that it might go exactly this way. He'd brought the beeping decoy anyway, because being arrested in front of every camera at the regatta was itself a kind of witness. You cannot quietly disappear a man the whole world just watched get cuffed. "You want to explain the case?" the detective asked him across the table, the steel case sitting between them beeping. "Mr. Mercer says you tried to extort him, says you threatened to plant contamination evidence unless he paid, says this is the ransom you hauled to his finish line to embarrass him." The detective was tired and unconvinced of Marcus, and a beeping steel case, dragged out of the ocean by a soaking wet stranger, did not help. "It's counting down. You want to tell me what happens when it hits zero?" "When it hits zero," Marcus said. "It erases itself. That's what it's built to do. Expose it to air, tamper with it, and it wipes clean." He nodded at it. "Go ahead. Watch it happen. Then ask yourself why a man trying to extort somebody would haul the one piece of evidence out here that's designed to destroy itself." The first turn came right there in the interrogation room when the timer hit zero, and the case did exactly what Marcus said it would, wiping itself in front of the detective because it did not contain money, and it did not contain a bomb. The beeping was a data recorder's self-erase timer, a mechanism designed to wipe its contents the moment it was exposed to air and tampered with, and inside was the logging unit from those seabed sensors documenting thousands of tons of industrial toxin discharged into the fishery over years. But Marcus, who understood exactly what a tamper timer was the moment he saw its housing on the seabed, had done the one thing his enemies never accounted for. Out at the wreck. Before he ever started for the harbor, he had opened the recorder, underwater, extracted the actual data drive, sealed it in a spare sample vial from his kit, and clipped it inside his wetsuit against his own skin. Then, he'd reassembled the empty case around the tamper mechanism and let it keep counting. The case he'd towed to the finish line, the one that had beeped so dramatically, the one now erasing itself to nothing, in police custody, had always been a decoy. He had never brought the evidence into the room. He had brought the thing they would try to destroy precisely so he could stand back and watch who tried to destroy it, and learn from that exactly who was afraid. There was a second payoff to the kit he'd cut loose during the swim, though he didn't know it yet. When investigators later dragged the seabed near the buoy where he'd started his tow, they found his sunken dive rig, and its position carried by the same current that had carried Marcus, confirmed his account of where he'd been and when, and helped map the drift straight back to the drum cache. The rig he'd sacrificed to save the case ended up testifying too, and Elise Grant, the harbor master, was the one who quietly made sure the real drive reached a lab. She used her authority to reroute a piece of harbor equipment, a buoy, without telling Marcus why or how, and her motives stayed opaque, and Marcus, sitting in a holding cell, did not know whether the woman who'd slipped him a radio frequency was an ally or was running her own game. Then came the second turn, and it cut into Marcus himself, because that personnel file Grant Mercer had waved at the cameras was real. Marcus had been fired from a rescue operation. He admitted it to the detective, to Elise, to himself again. Years ago, on a salvage job, he had broken a direct order and pulled his team out of a flooded section against instructions, and in the chaos of that decision, a teammate had been injured. He was not a flawless hero, but the order he'd broken had been an order to send his team into water the company knew was contaminated, into exactly the kind of poison he'd just found on the seabed, and he had refused, and a man had gotten hurt in the refusing, and the company had used that injury to brand Marcus reckless and end his career, burying the reason he'd disobeyed. His whole life since had been shaped by that, the guilt of the injury, and the fury that his refusal to poison his own team had been the thing they hung him for. "So, it's true," the detective said, holding the file Mercer had provided. You were fired for a safety violation on a rescue op. A man got hurt." "It's true," Marcus said. He did not flinch from it, and he did not perform contrition either. "A man got hurt because I pulled my team out of water the company knew was contaminated. They'd tested it. They knew, and they ordered us in anyway on a clock for a salvage bonus. I said no. In the confusion of getting my people out, one of them went down hard and broke his back. I will carry that until I die. But you should know what they left out of that file. They left out why I disobeyed. They left out the poison. Because the poison was the same story I just swam to the bottom of the ocean to prove is still happening." He leaned forward. 20 years and it's the exact same crime. People with money deciding that a working man's lungs are an acceptable cost. I've been fighting it my whole life. I'm not going to stop because you've got a piece of paper that only tells half of it. Grant Mercer's people had known that history, all of it, and known exactly how to use the half that hurt him. The third turn was the one that hurt because it came from the one person who'd helped him. Elise Grant took the data drive, the real one, and Marcus watched her hand it directly to Grant Mercer. She was not a neutral harbor master. She was Mercer's business partner. And she had been playing Marcus from the dock, from the moment she slipped him that frequency. The betrayal was total, and it was meant to be, and Marcus felt every inch of it, because he had let himself trust her. Except it was a betrayal folded inside a longer game, and Marcus wasn't the only one being deceived. The drive Elise handed to Mercer was a copy, and she had planted a locator in it, because she was not trying to protect Mercer. She was trying to find the offshore cache, where the network stored the rest of its evidence and its next shipment of drums, a cache only Mercer could lead her to. But she had never told Marcus the plan, and that was her real sin. Not the deception of Mercer, but the using of Marcus, the deciding, without his consent, exactly how much danger he would absorb on her behalf. When it came out, Marcus refused to simply forgive it. "You did the same thing they did," he told her. "You looked at me and decided how much risk I could carry, and you never once asked me. That's the whole problem. That's the entire thing I've been fighting my whole life." "I got the case to the lab," Elise said when he confronted her. "I planted the tracker. It's working, Marcus. Mercer's leading us straight to the cache. It worked." "It worked," Marcus repeated. "You keep saying that word like it's the only one that matters." He was so tired and so angry, and the anger was clean because it was old. "You put a tracker on me too, didn't you? Not a device. Just the same trick. You looked at me on that dock, and you decided I was useful, and you decided how much I could take, and you never once asked. You slipped me a frequency and let me get my air cut, and hauled that case across the ocean, not knowing I was bait in your operation." He shook his head. "You want to know the difference between you and Mercer? He decided my life was worth less than a race. You decided it was worth spending on your case. Both of you did the deciding. Neither of you asked the man in the water." Elise had no answer for that because there wasn't one. They ended up working together because the locator had worked and Mercer was moving, but the trust between them was a wound that stayed a wound. And Marcus made sure it did because some wounds you keep open on purpose so you don't forget what made them. Because Mercer, realizing the drive was compromised and the locator had led investigators to the cache, made his move in the only language he had left: destruction. High took the Meridian out into worsening weather, past the point where any sane captain would have turned back and drove her bow into a research buoy station, the anchor point of the underwater evidence cache, trying to smash the whole network of proof to the seabed and dress the wreck up as a tragic accident of the storm. He would rather sink his own yacht than let the ocean give up what it knew. That was the measure of the man and of what he was protecting. And Marcus Hale, who had every reason on earth to let those people drown, went back into the water. The storm had teeth by the time they reached the buoy station. The Meridian had rammed it and torn her own hull doing it, and now she was going down in 6-foot swells with her crew still aboard, and the men who had left Marcus at sea were about to learn exactly what that felt like. "Hi, Dove," On the foundering Meridian into the flooding hidden compartment he'd found 6 hours and a lifetime ago. The water inside black and churning and full of the drums the compartment had been built to carry. Grant Mercer clung to the canting deck and screamed down at him that he was a thief and a saboteur, that the crew was not to help him, that he was here to finish destroying the evidence. It was almost funny that even now, even sinking Mercer's first instinct was to protect the crime instead of the men. Marcus ignored him. He had a choice about what to do first, and it defined him. He could save the drowning people who had left him to die, or he could open the evidence beacon and broadcast the data before the sea swallowed it forever. He did both, but he did them in the order that mattered. He got to the compartment, and he activated the beacon, and he transmitted the sensor data over the regatta's own sonar network on the emergency frequency Elise had handed him on the dock a lifetime ago, the frequency he'd almost dismissed. Every vessel in the race carried recording instruments, dozens of boats. And in one transmission, Marcus turned each of them into a copy of the truth, scattered across dozens of hard drives, on dozens of hulls too widely spread for any lawyer or fire or furnace or ocean to ever call it all back. You cannot erase a thing once it lives in 50 places at once. That was the whole lesson of his life, and he spent it in a single breath 40 feet down. And then with the data safe and the men who'd left him, still trapped and screaming above Marcus, faced the choice that told him who he was. He could climb out and let the sea take the ones who'd cut his line. No one would have blamed him. Instead, he turned back into the flooding hull and pulled them out one at a time. The crew, the stewards, and last of all, Grant Mercer himself, dragging the man who had left him to drown up through black water into the storm and the light, because Marcus Hale had decided a long time ago that he would not become the thing that had tried to become of him. The final turn broke the surface with him. Grant Mercer was not the top of the pyramid. Mercer was an operator, a wealthy one, but the charity that organized the entire regatta, the glossy foundation with its banners and its galas, was itself the laundering machine, and it was run by Roland Pike, the president of the yacht club, a man who had built a beloved public image out of ocean conservation while running the very dumping network that poisoned it. Marcus, dripping on the dock, with the whole club watching, did not have proof against Pike in hand. So he made them convict each other. Standing on the dock, dripping with the whole club and the cameras watching, he said the one thing he knew would work on men like these, that the prosecutors were offering immunity to exactly one person, the first to cooperate, one seat at the table, and no more, and that the seat was filling fast. It was mostly a bluff. It didn't have to be true. It only had to be believed by men who trusted no one, least of all each other. And he watched Grant Mercer look at Roland Pike, and Roland Pike look at his operators, and every one of them do the same arithmetic, which was, if I don't talk first, someone else will, and they'll trade me for that seat. They turned on one another in front of everyone, a scramble of lawyers and accusations, each racing to be the one who talked first, and in their panic they laid the whole structure bare more completely than any evidence Marcus could have carried up from the seabed. Theo Marsh, the captain, found Marcus afterward. He confessed that he had been the one to give the order to leave Marcus at sea, that Mercer had threatened his master's license, his livelihood, his family's security if he refused. It was a real fear and a real pressure, and it did not make what he'd done anything other than what it was. Marcus made him say it into a recording on the record before he would accept the man's help or his apology, because a confession that costs nothing is not a confession. I need you to say it into this, Marcus said, holding up the recorder. Not for a judge, for you. You've been telling yourself for days it wasn't really your hand on the order. It was. Say it. Theo Marsh looked at the record for a long time. I gave the order to leave you, he said finally, his voice cracking. Mercer told me my license was gone, my house, everything, if the race was late or the dive report went in. I told myself you had a bailout bottle. I told myself you'd be fine. I told myself a lot of things so I could turn the boat. He stopped. I turned the boat, Marcus. That was me. Yeah, Marcus said. It was. He did not soften it, and he did not spit on the man either. You had a real reason, and you made a real choice, and a man nearly died. Both of those things are true at the same time. That's the part nobody wants to hold. He clicked the recorder off. Theo had to live with it after that suspended. Investigated a working man who had chosen his own safety over another's life and would carry it. And Marcus did not pretend the confession had washed it clean, because it hadn't. The case widened far beyond one yacht. The dumping network was exposed, and the fine money and the seized assets were directed by court order into the remediation of the poisoned waters, real cleanup. This time not the fake celebrated kind. Roland Pike's foundation was dismantled. Grant Mercer faced charges that his money could delay but not dissolve. And in the deposition under oath, Mercer was made to state for the record the full name of the diver he had left at sea, the man he had greeted by the wrong name on the dock, because he could not be bothered to learn the right one. Marcus Hale. He had to say it correctly into the record a dozen times, and every time he said it, it landed like a small stone laid on the grave of the version of the world where men like Marcus didn't have names worth learning. And Elise Grant, whose locator had cracked the case, was not simply thanked and let go. She faced her own investigation for the reckless, unilateral way she'd run her operation for using a man's life without his knowledge. Because helping at the last minute does not erase the cost of everything before it, and the story refused to pretend otherwise. Marcus Hale was offered the leadership of the harbor's dive safety team, and he took it on one condition, that he wrote into the charter himself, that any diver on his team had the absolute right to refuse a dive. They judged unsafe, without penalty, without argument, without a Theo Marsh being told to sign or lose his license. It was the reform he'd been reaching for his entire career, the thing the injured teammate had cost him, the thing they'd left him at sea, rather than allow. 20 years earlier, refusing an unsafe order had ended his career and broken a man's back and branded him reckless. Now that same refusal was written into the charter, as a right in plain language, signed and posted where every diver could read it. No one enters the water on someone else's judgment of their safety. High made it law for everyone who came after him, so that no diver on his crew would ever again have to choose between their conscience and their livelihood. The way Theo Marsh had the way he himself had the way. The whole rotten arrangement had always required working people to choose. The last image is Marcus at the water's edge, a new dive kit at his feet to replace the one he'd let sink, checking his airline twice before he goes down the way he always will now. Not because he is afraid, because he has learned exactly what it means to trust your air to other people's hands, and he has decided that from here on, no one but Marcus Hale gets to cut his line. He does not dive to prove he isn't afraid. He checks the line and he checks it again, and Elise Grant is not there beside him because helping at the end had not been enough to earn a place there, and the water below him is clearer than the Meridian's crew ever left him in. And this time, the only person who decides his risk is the man in the water. He goes down slow the way he always has into the quiet blue, where the class and the money and the wrong names cannot follow. And for a little while, there is only the sound of his own breathing, even and unhurried, the breath of a man who was left to drown and swam back with the truth in his hands. So here is what I want to leave you with. Who gets to decide how much danger a working person has to accept when the ones giving the orders never once get in the water themselves? Marcus Hale spent his whole life being told the answer was other people. He finally made it himself. If this story moved you, subscribe and tell me. In the comments, has anyone ever asked you to take a risk they'd never take, and what did it cost you to say no?